Ninja Gaiden Master Collection is Koei Tecmo's newest release on the Nintendo Switch, and this is another one of Koei Tecmo's bundling of 3 classic games being brought over to current gen consoles, be it the Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, and Xbox Series S and X, and obviously PC as well. So no one is being left out for this trilogy that I'm sure is gonna have a little bit of mixed reactions when it comes to some classics of the originals, because let's face it, Gaiden has had a little bit of a stigma throughout the years that I'm not necessarily sure is warranted, and this is coming from someone who's basically playing these games for the very first time. But right away, it should be cleared up that all of the previously available game modes and DLC costumes for each one of the characters are included in this game. So basically, Sigma 1, 2, and 3 are all getting all of their previously available DLC included in this bundling, which is great to see. However, on the downside of that, online multiplayer modes are not going to be available. This includes things like the Tag Missions mode in Sigma 2, Shadows of the World, and even the clan battles for Ninja Gaiden 3, and obviously the Ninja Trials as well. Now, the reason why I mentioned earlier that this collection could be a bit divisive, and it comes from the fact that it is based off the Sigma games. Ninja Gaiden Sigma from 2007, Ninja Gaiden Sigma 2 from 2009, and Ninja Gaiden 3 Razor's Edge from 2012. Fans of the very original Black games are not necessarily too thrilled that they decided to bring over the Sigma versions instead of the originals. And we actually have a couple of developer quotes to clarify some of that. They're saying that Ninja Gaiden Master Collection is based off the PlayStation 3 version in quality, including things like the CG models, but also the modes that are included, some of which are actually available from the Vita version, which were brand new. And to contextualize that even further, Sigma added several new things like dual wieldings, tons of new lore, Rachel being a playable character, tons of quality of life changes, and the aforementioned modes. This includes the hero mode, which is available in Sigma 1 and 2, that's also available in the collection, and this is basically a newcomer friendly option for the game, which was fabulous for basically being tough as hell to get through. So it basically made the game a little bit easier and a little bit more approachable, since in the original games people were having a tough time to get through them. Another important tidbit of information is that basically Ninja Gaiden Black and Ninja Gaiden 2 are not included in this, and the developers also have a reasoning for that. For Ninja Gaiden Black and the original Ninja Gaiden 2, only pieces of the original data were still intact, and they couldn't salvage either one of them, and that's the reason why this collection is based off the Sigma version. So at least with that context in hand, we can understand why this Master Collection was put together with Sigma at the forefront, because they are basically the most modern versions that were actually attainable by Koei Tecmo. So with that context out of the way, I actually want to move over to speak a little bit about the story, and then I'll go over the gameplay. As you might have already known, the story revolves around Ryu Hayabusa, but that's not the whole story. The Dragon Sword, and specifically the True Dragon Swords, are the driving factor for these series, but they didn't necessarily originate in this trilogy. They actually go back to the original arcade games. In Sigma 1, Ryu's village is invaded by fiendish creatures, so he quickly makes haste by putting them out of their misery, while looking extremely cool in the process. As he makes his way to the shrine where he's basically this creature named Doku takes the aforementioned dragon sword for himself. To get it back, he travels to Vigur, a nation built by some of the very original arcade games' descendants and even minions. It's worth mentioning that these games actually take place in the early Hayabusa storyline, so much so that most of the arcade games and even the Dead or Alive games take place after this specific trilogy. With that said, in Sigma 2, the Black Spiders are on the prowl. This legendary ninja clan has several goals in mind, but one of them is to get their hands on, of course, the True Dragon Sword. As it would now become tradition, Ryu makes his way around the globe to track down Genshin, the Black Spider's most notorious fighter, and take the sword of the Archfiend for himself. And finally, this led us to Ninja Gaiden 3, where the Lords of the Alchemy finally make an appearance, and perhaps the weirdest twist in the series takes place, as Ryu Hayabusa is cursed with the very blade he's sworn to protect, and all of the souls and calamity he's caused with it are now turned back against him as a twist. So he goes about trying to cleanse the curse, while of course killing down as many enemies and creatures as possible, perhaps learning nothing in the process. Gameplay is your very traditional typical action game affair, where you're moving from one area to another, sometimes through specific corridors, to a little bit of a circle arena type areas where you're going to be fighting enemies, trying to take them out, clear a specific wave, move on to the next area, and do it all over again. Throughout all 3 games, you start out with your very basic weapon and slowly amass your inventory as you gain more and more weapons added to your arsenal, as either friends lend them to you or you get them off fiends and stuff like that. So your arsenal is constantly evolving, and the weapon type and the weapon variety is actually extremely good, and they all seem to have their very own basic combos. You have things like parries, dodges, jumps, and reading enemy movement is key in some situations to be able to advance, since they will definitely cheese you up if you aren't too careful. You'll also be collecting things like healing potions, boosters, and stuff like that along the way to ease up the difficulty a little bit, but ultimately, this series originally starts out as being a little bit slow and methodical in your approach and your combat mechanics. And then in Sigma 2 and then obviously in 3, it speeds it up considerably. So the very first game actually feels a little bit slower, and you're actually a little bit more tactile in the way you're going to be able to handle these enemies. You want to make sure you parry at the right time, you want to make sure you dash at the right time, avoid some of the incoming damage. You don't necessarily have to often heal. But then in Sigma 2, it feels like they ratchet up to another level when it comes to just speeding up combat. Maybe that's by design, I'm not sure. Again, I haven't played the originals. This is all that I've ever been exposed to when it comes to this series, but they feel extremely fast. And then you have these like QTE moments where they're not necessarily asking you to do a button press, but basically the camera takes over, it shifts position, you do these flashy kills, these flashy attacks, and Gaiden 3 specifically just takes that to another level, where you are just comboing from one enemy to another, and it's flashy combat galore, where it just feels like everything is just kind of like taking care of itself. You're doing a couple of basic inputs, and that's probably one of the biggest criticisms for Ninja Gaiden 3 specifically, where you are doing a couple of attacks and then somehow things are just automatically triggered and you slice up 3 to 4 enemies all at once, and it just kind of feels a little bit empty and a little bit hollow. I feel like Ninja Gaiden Sigma 2 is probably the best spot in the combat situation, where it does have some of that, but it still feels like your input and the way you're actually fighting is a little bit more dictated by your movements and the way you want to be able to deal and engage with the enemies. Whereas on the third one, again, it just feels like it just kind of takes off on its own, and I didn't necessarily feel too happy with that. The first one, again, feels more methodical and slower, and my comparison to that feels like Onimusha. If you remember the original PlayStation 2 classic, that game is definitely slower in that regard. It doesn't feel like a Souls-like by any means, but it's definitely slower in approach, and Ninja Gaiden Sigma 1 feels very close to that. It's faster, but it's still closer to that same idea, where Ninja Gaiden 2 and 3 take the more Bayonetta Devil May Cry approach, where they're more flashier, they're more active in your systems, the way you're attacking enemies, but at the same time they are hindered by those same flashy mechanics. There is also something to be said about Sigma 3 adding a lot of just weird platforming and weird like sequence areas that I'm not necessarily too thrilled about. It feels like the game just kind of expands on what it's trying to do and overscopes itself, and it just feels a little bit weird in that regard. But it is the best looking game out of all of them, for sure. Sigma 1, of course, feels, because obviously as the oldest one, looks and feels a little bit just slow and clunky, but visually it's just clean enough. Sigma 2 definitely stands out a little bit more as a visual bump. Obviously, it's also, I believe, originally a 360 game, so of course it looked better. But then Ninja Gaiden 3 for sure looks the best out of all of them, and is also in Nintendo Switch one of the reasons why it probably has the worst performance out of all of them. I'm not saying it's unplayable by any means. It's definitely very good and you can get through it, but you can definitely see some of the performance issues. I did spend a lot of times with it on the Nintendo Switch Lite, and this feels very playable in that regard. So for those people with a Nintendo Switch Lite, don't necessarily worry about it. There's not necessarily anything like UI or HUD situations that you need to worry about. So, you know, you should be good to go. Ninja Gaiden Master Collection is another good effort from Koei Tecmo when it comes to bringing over some classics to modern gen consoles, and specifically the Nintendo Switch, which has seen a lot of support from Koei Tecmo. And I'm definitely glad to be able to finally have this game, not just necessarily on the go, but people who have never been able to play any of these games in the past finally have a path to be able to play them in what's easily going to be one of the best visual versions of these games. Nintendo Sphere gives Ninja Gaiden Master Collection on Nintendo Switch an 8 out of 10. If you're brand new to my channel, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Hit the bell to receive notifications when the videos go up, and as always, thank you so much for watching. See ya!